The royal fleet of the Zarth Dominion floated through the Black Sea of Stars like an unstoppable storm. Their ships shone with silver armor, each one marked with the golden crest of the royal house. They were the rulers of 50 worlds, conquerors of empires, and the name Zarth was enough to make whole civilizations surrender without a fight. To them, this was just another small victory. Prince Kalreth, son of the Zarth king, stood on the bridge of his flagship Glorious Fang. His tall figure was wrapped in a royal combat robe, his violet eyes burning with arrogance and confidence. This mission was meant to be simple. A small human outpost had been spotted near the border of Zarth space. Reports said it was nothing more than a scout unit, a group of explorers and low-grade soldiers, nothing serious. Scouts, the prince said, laughing softly. My father sends me to crush insects. Hardly a task for a prince. Around him his generals bowed and praised him, saying it would be a quick and glorious victory. The Zarth believed the humans were still a primitive species, strong maybe, but undisciplined, emotional, and foolish. The prince thought the same. Move into position, he ordered. Show them the might of the Dominion. The fleet advanced, hundreds of shining ships sliding into orbit above the small blue planet. On the surface, a few lights blinked, signs of human structures, maybe a few defense turrets. Nothing more. The prince leaned forward, his long fingers tapping on the edge of the control panel. Fire, he said. A moment later, dozens of energy beams cut through the dark. The ground below exploded in brilliant flashes, and the prince smiled as the display filled with flames and static. He imagined the humans running in panic, begging for mercy, but as the smoke cleared, something strange appeared on the sensors. Tactical report, the prince demanded. Your Highness, said the sensor officer, multiple human ships rising from the planet's atmosphere. Around 12 vessels. The prince raised a brow. Only 12? And they still dare to resist? He chuckled. This will be entertaining. The Zarth fleet locked on and prepared another wave of fire. But then, the human ships moved. They were smaller, rough-looking, patched with different kinds of armor. Some even looked like they'd been built from scrap. But the way they moved, fast, sharp, and fearless, caught the prince's attention. Within seconds, they flew straight toward his front line, weaving through the gaps in his formation. Fools, he shouted. They are throwing their lives away. Yet the next moment, the bridge shook violently. One of the Zarth destroyers exploded into light. Then another. The humans had fired, tiny weapons compared to Zarth cannons, but they struck with deadly precision. It was as if every shot had been aimed by a master hunter. Status, the prince roared. 2 destroyers lost. Shield integrity dropping. Impossible. From only 12 ships? The prince stared at the hollow map, unable to believe what he was seeing. His fleet was massive, but in minutes the humans had torn holes in his front ranks. They moved like ghosts, disappearing into asteroid shadows, reappearing behind his ships and hitting their weak spots with perfect timing. Who are these humans? One of the generals muttered. They fight like demons. The prince clenched his fists. No, they are weak. They will break. But deep down something cold was growing in his chest. He watched as one of the human ships, heavily damaged and burning, rammed itself into a Zarth cruiser. Both vessels vanished in a burst of light. The humans didn't retreat. They didn't surrender. They kept fighting with a fire the prince had never seen before. His voice trembled when he spoke again. Signal the fleet. All ships. Focus fire on them. And this now. As his order echoed through the command decks, he stared at the flickering image of the human ships on the screen. 12 tiny sparks standing against a sea of darkness. He didn't know it yet. But this small scout unit would change his understanding of war, of courage, and of what it truly meant to face humans. Because this battle, what he thought would be an easy victory, was only the beginning of his nightmare. The battle above Outpost Theta raged like thunder. Fire streaked across the stars as human ships fought against an enemy 10 times their size. On the command deck of the Vanguard, Captain Mira Lawson stood at the center, her hand steady on the console. Though the air around her shook with every impact, she was a calm woman, tall, dark-haired, her uniform scorched and torn from a blast that had rocked the ship minutes ago. Her voice, however, remained firm. "Status report." Her second officer, Lieutenant Hale, looked pale. "Shields are at 30%. 2 of our ships are gone. The Resolute and the Hope." His voice cracked. "They rammed the enemy cruiser before losing power." Mira's jaw tightened. They did what they had to. She looked at the display, a chaotic dance of red and blue dots. The Zarth fleet was massive, elegant, and full of deadly energy beams. The human ships were smaller, worn-out explorers refitted for defense. Yet they moved with spirit, refusing to fall quietly. The communication officer turned. "Captain, Earth Command is on the line. They're requesting a report." Mira nodded. "Patch them through." The holographic face of Admiral Core appeared, his expression heavy with worry. "Captain Lawson, your unit was never meant for direct combat. We're sending reinforcements, but they'll take at least a week to reach your position. You need to retreat." Mira shook her head. "We can't. If we pull back, they'll reach the colonies behind us. There are families there, Admiral, civilians." "Lawson," he said softly, "you're a recon unit. You're not equipped for this." She smiled faintly, though her eyes were full of determination. "Then we'll just have to change what a scout unit means." The line went dead. Around her, the crew stood silent for a moment. Then Hale spoke quietly. "Orders, Captain?" Mira straightened her back. "We fight." The bridge filled with movement again. Pilots called out targeting data. Engineers rerouted power to the railguns. The humans didn't have fancy weapons, but they had something the Zarth didn't. Grit. "Fire on my mark," Mira commanded. "Target their command vessel. Let them know we're not running." The Vanguard's guns roared. Beams of light cut across the void, striking the alien flagship's flank. The explosion that followed shook even the massive Zarth ship. The humans cheered for a brief second before the next wave of alien fire hit them. The deck trembled violently. Sparks rained down from the ceiling. Hale fell to one knee, gripping the console. "We can't take another hit like that." "Then we won't," Mira said. Evasive pattern Delta 3. The Vanguard spun between debris fields and drifting asteroids. Every move was dangerous, but Mira trusted her crew. They had trained together for years. They weren't warriors by birth, but they had learned to survive together. Outside, human fighters weaved between alien cruisers, launching missiles with precision born of desperation. One pilot shouted over the comms, "For Earth!" before slamming his ship into the enemy shield generator, tearing it apart. On the Zarth flagship, Prince Calreth watched in disbelief. "They are mad," he said under his breath. "They throw their lives away without hesitation." An officer replied nervously, "My prince, their losses are heavy, but every one of them takes something from us. They fight as if death means nothing." Calreth turned his gaze toward the burning blue planet below. "Then we will teach them fear." Back on the Vanguard, Captain Mira felt the ship shudder again. She knew the end was close, but she also knew something deeper. Every second they held the line was one more second for Earth's reinforcements to arrive, one more chance for others to live. She pressed the comms button. "To all ships," she said, her voice calm and strong. "You've all fought bravely. The Zarth think we're just scouts. Let's show them how wrong they are." All across the fleet, weary human voices answered, "Aye, Captain." As the stars outside burned with battle light, the humans stood their ground, tiny lights in a vast darkness, and though they knew death was close, none of them wavered. They weren't fighting for victory anymore. They were fighting for each other, and the Zarth Dominion had just learned the most dangerous truth of all humans do not surrender. The command deck of the Zarth flagship was filled with smoke and chaos. The prince's perfect world of pride and power was breaking apart before his eyes. The walls that once glowed with royal blue light now flickered with sparks. Officers shouted over each other. trying to keep control of a situation none of them understood. Prince Calreth stood tall in the center, though his golden armor was covered with dust and scorch marks. His violet eyes were wide with disbelief. "How can this be happening?" he whispered. "We are the Zarth Dominion. We have never lost a battle to a lesser race." A trembling officer bowed low. "Your Highness, the humans. They destroyed another of our destroyers. Their ships are small, but they fight like—" He hesitated. "Like they don't care if they live or die." Calreth's sharp voice cut through the air. "Fools, every warrior fears death. Every soldier wants to live." But even as he said those words, he looked at the tactical map and saw something that froze his blood. The humans weren't retreating. Even the ships that were damaged beyond repair stayed in formation. One of their smaller vessels, engulfed in flames, was diving directly toward a Zarth battleship. "No, they wouldn't," Calreth muttered. The explosion that followed was bright enough to blind the bridge crew. When the light faded, both ships were gone, nothing left but wreckage. For a long moment, no one spoke. Then the sense, or officer said quietly, "That was their 5th suicide run, my prince." Calreth turned toward him slowly.
"5th?"
"Yes, my prince, each time. They take one of ours with them." The prince clenched his fists until his claws dug into his palms. The Zarth had fought many wars, but never against an enemy like this. They were used to fear. They were used to enemies who surrendered the moment the royal fleet appeared. But these humans, they did not fear death. They seemed to fight harder the closer they came to it. "Why?" Calreth asked softly, almost to himself. "Why would they fight this way? What do they gain?" None of his officers could answer. The sound of explosions filled the background as more reports came in. Damage here, another ship lost there. The prince's heart beat fast with something new, something he had never known before. It wasn't anger. It wasn't frustration. It was fear. He stepped closer to the viewing window and looked out at the human ships darting through the stars. They were small and broken, but each movement was sharp, purposeful. He could almost feel their determination like a pulse through the void. "Who are they?" he asked quietly. "What kind of beings fight with such madness?" An old general approached him and spoke in a low tone. "My prince, permission to withdraw. We are losing too many ships. The enemy's tactics are unpredictable. They hit us where it hurts the most. If we fall back, we can regroup." Calreth glared at him. "Withdraw? From a handful of humans? Do you want the galaxy to laugh at us?" The general bowed his head. "The galaxy may laugh, my prince, but if we stay, there will be no one left to laugh at." Before the prince could reply, another explosion rocked the flagship. The lights went out for a moment. The bridge filled with alarm sounds. A voice cried out, "They've breached our lower decks." Calreth's breath caught. "They've boarded us?" "Yes, my prince. A small team, 5 humans, used the wreckage of their ship to crash into our hull. They're inside." The idea was unthinkable. A boarding attempt by only 5 soldiers against thousands of Zarth crew. It was madness, but the humans did it anyway. Calreth watched the security feed. 5 figures in damaged suits, weapons glowing faintly, cutting through metal doors. Their faces were hidden by helmets, but their movements were confident and calm. One of the humans looked straight into a camera lens for a moment before the feed cut off. The prince froze. There was no fear in that human's eyes, only defiance. He turned to his officers and shouted, "Seal the lower decks. Capture them alive. I want to see the face of this cursed species." But inside his heart trembled. He had expected the humans to beg, to flee, to surrender. Instead, they had become something else, an unstoppable storm of courage. As the flagship shook again and alarms screamed around him, Prince Calreth realized something terrible. He wasn't fighting an army. He was fighting belief. And belief was something even an empire couldn't crush. The vanguard drifted through the smoke-filled battlefield like a wounded beast refusing to die. Its engines flickered weakly. The hull was cracked in several places and fire burned through the lower decks. Yet inside, every crew member still held their position. The air smelled of burnt metal and fear, but above it all was courage. Quiet, unbroken courage. Captain Mira Lawson stood on the bridge, blood running down the side of her face. Her uniform was torn, and the flickering lights made her look ghostly. Around her, her crew worked with trembling hands, doing everything they could to keep the ship alive. "Status?" she asked, her voice soft but steady. Lieutenant Hale, coughing from the smoke, checked the readings. Engines barely holding. Shields gone. "We've lost 8 ships, Captain. Only 4 of us left." Mira's eyes moved across the holographic map. 4 tiny blue lights surrounded by a sea of red. The enemy. Her lips pressed into a thin line. "How far to the Zarth flagship?" 8,000 kilometers, Hale replied. "But their escorts are thick. We won't make it through alive." Mira smiled faintly. "We don't need to make it out alive, Lieutenant. We just need to make it count." Her crew turned toward her. No one spoke. They all knew what she meant. This was the end. But it was their choice how it would end, running or standing tall. She pressed the intercom button. Her voice echoed across every surviving ship in the fleet. "All units, this is Captain Lawson of the Vanguard. We've done our duty. We've held them longer than anyone thought possible. But we can't let them leave this system. We can't let them reach the colonies. So today we give everything. Let's show them what humans are made of." There was a long silence. Then one by one voices answered through the static. "For Earth. For our families. For the ones who come after. And then, for you, Captain." Mira's throat tightened, but she didn't let it show. "Then let's finish this." The Vanguard and the last 3 human ships turned their engines toward the enemy fleet. The Zarth formation shifted, confused for a moment by the suicidal maneuver. The prince watched from his flagship, eyes wide. "They're charging us?" he said in disbelief. "They have no shields, no power left. What are they thinking?" His general swallowed nervously. "They are thinking, my prince, that they can still hurt us." The humans flew straight through the center of the enemy formation. Explosions followed them like a trail of fire. Alien ships turned and fired, but the humans didn't dodge. They just kept going. Inside the Vanguard, every light was red. Warnings screamed. The ship shook violently. "Captain," Hale shouted. "We've lost engine control." "Then we fly with momentum," Mira said calmly. "Set the reactor to overload." He froze. "That'll destroy us." "I know," she said softly. "But it'll destroy them too." She looked out the window. The enemy flagship loomed larger and larger, its royal insignia glowing bright. She thought of Earth, of green fields, of cities shining under the sun, of her sister laughing before Mira left on this mission. A warm smile touched her lips. She whispered, "At least they'll be safe." Then she gave her final order. "All power to forward thrusters. Aim for their command core." The Vanguard surged ahead. Alarms blared louder, but Mira stood straight, watching the stars blur. Around her, her crew took their last breaths in silence, no fear, no regret. Just pride. Prince Calreth's eyes widened as the human ship came closer, glowing brighter with each passing second. "No," he whispered. "They wouldn't, but they did." The Vanguard struck the Zarth flagship dead center. The explosion was blinding, a wave of fire and light that ripped through space. The shockwave shattered dozens of Zarth ships. When it finally cleared, the Vanguard was gone. Only silence remained. Calreth stumbled as the deck of his crippled flagship tilted under him. Smoke filled the air, alarm screamed. "Damage report!" he shouted, but his voice cracked. An officer looked up at him, eyes wide with fear. "My prince, the humans' last ship destroyed half our fleet." Calreth's mouth opened, but no words came. The galaxy's proudest prince stared into the burning void, realizing the truth. He had faced not an army, but a handful of explorers, and they had fought like legends. Silence filled the stars after the explosion. The battlefield that once burned with light was now a graveyard. Twisted metal drifted slowly through the void, remains of ships that had once carried pride, courage, and fear. The wreckage of the Zarth royal fleet floated alongside the broken pieces of human vessels. The stars themselves seemed to mourn the dead. Inside the damaged flagship Glorious Fang, Prince Calreth stood in darkness. Smoke curled from the ceiling. The air was thick with the smell of burned circuits and blood. His royal cape was torn, his face blackened with soot, his crown gone somewhere in the chaos. Around him, the bridge crew worked quietly, too afraid to speak. "How many ships remain?" the prince asked, his voice hoarse. The censor officer hesitated. "Only 35, my prince. Out of 300. Calreth blinked, not believing it at first. 35? "Yes, my prince," the officer whispered. "And half of those are damaged beyond fighting condition." The prince turned toward the window, his reflection faint against the cold stars. His fleet, the greatest in the Dominion, was destroyed. By humans, not by their grand armies or vast colonies, not by an empire's invasion, but by a single scout unit. He gritted his teeth. "They were explorers," he muttered. "Scouts, not soldiers. How could they do this?" The general beside him lowered his head. "Perhaps, my prince, they fought for something greater than conquest. Perhaps that is their strength." Calreth said nothing. He watched as a piece of a human ship drifted past the viewport. On it, faintly visible, were the painted words Vanguard Explorer Corps. The letters were cracked and burned, but they stood out like a message written across eternity. He remembered the woman who had spoken to him before the final attack, the human captain. Her face had appeared on his comm screen, blood on her cheek but calm in her eyes. "You came to kill explorers," she had said. "You'll leave with ghosts." At the time, he had thought her words arrogant. Now they echoed in his mind like a curse. He walked slowly across the ruined bridge, his boots crunching over shattered glass. His heart felt heavy in his chest, heavier than the loss of ships or soldiers. It was shame. For the first time in his life, he understood that his power meant nothing against their will. A medic approached, trembling. "My prince, shall we contact the royal homeworld?" Calreth shook his head. "Not yet. What would I say? That the mighty Dominion lost to a handful of humans?" He looked up at the stars. "No. The galaxy must not know this. Not yet, but deep down he knew the truth would spread. Stories always did. Someone would find out how the Zarth had been humbled by explorers, and when they did, his name would forever be tied to that defeat." He turned to the communication officer. "Any human transmissions?" "Yes, my prince," the officer said softly. "One last signal before the explosion. It's repeating on open frequency." "Play it," Calreth ordered. A crackle of static filled the room. Then a voice, a woman's voice, came through. "Come steady and proud. If anyone's hearing this, tell Earth Command we held the line. Tell them humans don't run." The message ended. Then it played again, and again. Calreth listened in silence, his hands trembling slightly. There was no hatred in that voice, no anger. Just simple truth. Humans didn't run. He sank slowly into his throne chair, his eyes distant. The bridge was silent except for the repeating message. Around him, his crew bowed their heads. Even his generals, hardened veterans of 100 wars, seemed to feel something like respect. For the first time, the prince whispered words that no Zarth royal had ever spoken before. "We underestimated them. We thought them weak. But their weakness was their strength." He looked once more at the drifting wreckage outside, the silent tombs of brave souls. He knew that the humans had lost everything too, but somehow they had won. "They fought us with broken ships and dying hearts," Calreth murmured, his voice soft and full of awe. "And they still made gods bleed." The stars outside shimmered faintly, as if bowing their light to the fallen. And in that endless silence of space, even the proud prince of the Zarth Dominion could not help but feel small before the courage of humankind. The message reached Earth 3 days later, a single broken transmission carried across the cold emptiness of space, a faint signal filled with static and fire. It came from what remained of the 3rd Recon Fleet, the human scout unit that had vanished beyond the border. The voice that played through the speakers was soft but clear. like a whisper from ghosts. If anyone's hearing this, tell them we held. Tell them humans don't run. And then, silence. In the central command hall of Earth's Defense Directorate, hundreds of officers stood frozen as the recording ended. No one moved. The room, usually filled with noise and reports, felt like a grave. On the main screen, the names of every ship scrolled slowly. Vanguard, Hope, Resolute, Pathfinder, Dawnlight, each one marked as lost with all hands. Admiral Core sat at the head of the table, staring at the last coordinates of the battle. He had sent them there. He had ordered them to hold that position, and now they were gone. His voice cracked when he finally spoke. They were only scouts, he said quietly. Explorers? And they fought an empire. No one answered. What words could possibly fit such a loss? Down on Earth, news of the battle spread across every channel. Families gathered around screens, waiting, hoping for names. When the final casualty list came out, tears filled every home. Some wept in silence. Others lit candles in windows and whispered the names of their lost. In a small apartment in New Geneva, a young woman sat alone at her table. Her hands trembled as she held a photograph. Two sisters in uniform smiling beneath a bright sky. One of them was Captain Mira Lawson. They said you'd come back, the younger sister whispered. You promised. Her voice broke, but then she looked out the window at the thousands of candles glowing across the city. Each one was a tribute, a symbol of remembrance, and somehow she smiled through her tears. You kept your promise, she said softly. You protected us. The world mourned together. Flags flew at half-mast. Schools held moments of silence. The names of the fallen were engraved into a growing wall of honor, not as soldiers but as explorers who became heroes. In the days that followed, something changed in humanity. They had always been divided, by borders, by politics, by fear. But this time, the loss united them. For the first time, humanity looked beyond the stars not with greed or curiosity, but with determination. At a speech broadcast across every colony and ship, Admiral Core stood before the entire species. His uniform was black with mourning bands, his eyes hollow from sleepless nights, but his voice carried strength. They called it a scout unit, he began, but those men and women fought with the heart of humanity itself. They faced an empire that believed they were insignificant. And they proved them wrong. Today we do not cry for their deaths. We honor their courage, and we make a promise. Humanity will never kneel before tyranny. The crowd erupted, not in cheers, but in a solemn, unified silence. Across Earth, Mars, and the distant colonies, people stood straight, heads held high. Factories began to work again, not to build weapons of war, but to build ships of defense. New vessels named after the fallen ones. Vanguard 2, Hope's Flame, Resolute Star. Each ship carried the memory of those who refused to surrender. On the outer edges of space, satellites picked up the last echoes of the Zarth fleet retreating, broken and beaten. The humans had not conquered anything, but they had changed everything. The galaxy would never look at them the same way again. That night, under the dark sky of Earth, Mira Lawson's sister looked up at the stars. The same stars her sister had died beneath. She placed her hand over her heart and whispered, They thought you were scouts, Mira, but you were the first line of humanity's soul. And somewhere in the endless silence of space, the light of a distant explosion still glimmered faintly, like a promise burning forever. Weeks passed. The smoke of war faded, but the memory of that battle lingered in the hearts of many, both human and alien. Across the stars, whispers of the event spread like wildfire. The phrase "they were only scouts" became something more than a report. It became a warning, a legend. In the grand palace of the Zarth Empire, the royal court gathered once again. The vast hall, once filled with confidence and pride, now stood in uneasy silence. King Vorin sat on his throne, the weight of recent defeat heavy on his shoulders. His once proud army had returned in shambles, battered ships, trembling officers, and broken spirits. The Zarth had faced many enemies before, but never like this. Never something that refused to surrender even in certain death. The king's golden eyes dimmed as he replayed the last message intercepted from the battlefield. A human voice, calm and fearless. We hold the line. Humanity does not bow. Even now that voice echoed in his mind like a ghost. Prince Kalor, who had mocked the humans as primitive creatures, stood quietly beside his father. The arrogance in his tone was gone. He had seen the recordings himself. The small human ships diving into fire. The soldiers choosing to ram enemy cruisers when their weapons ran out. The burning human banners that still flew until the last breath. He finally spoke, his voice low. "Father, we fought their scouts. What happens when their army arrives?" No one answered. The hall remained silent, the truth too heavy to speak aloud. Across the galaxy, other alien empires listened to the reports with disbelief. The Zarth Empire, conqueror of 1,000 worlds, had been defeated by a human scouting unit. Some refused to believe it. Others began to fear what humanity truly was. On Earth, the scars of loss had not yet healed, but something powerful had grown in its place: unity. Humanity no longer saw itself as fragile or small. They had faced a galactic empire and survived. They had shown that courage was not measured by numbers or technology, but by heart. The new fleet, built in honor of the fallen, now stood ready in orbit. Sleek, shining ships, each one engraved with the names of those who perished. At the christening of the flagship Mira's Dawn, Admiral Kor stood beside Mira Lawson's younger sister. The girl touched the cold metal of the ship and whispered, "She would have loved this." Admiral Kor smiled faintly. "Your sister showed us what it means to be human," he said. "The galaxy will remember her name, and every soul that stood with her." As the ship's engines came alive, a golden light filled the sky, reflected in the eyes of thousands gathered below. It wasn't a light of war this time, and it was a light of legacy. Far across the stars on the Zarth homeworld, the king called for a meeting with his generals. "We must never again underestimate them," he said gravely. "Humans fight with something we cannot understand, something that burns even in death." Prince Kalor looked down, guilt in his eyes. "Honor," he said softly. "They fight for each other, not for power. We fight for conquest. That is why we lost." The king nodded slowly. For the first time, the Zarth Empire lowered its banners of pride and raised white flags of diplomacy. Messages were sent across the stars, words of peace, apology, and respect. When the message reached Earth, humanity did not celebrate victory. They did not boast or demand tribute. They simply replied, "We do not seek war. But remember this, when if you threaten our home again, even our scouts will be enough." The galaxy never forgot those words. The story of the human scout unit became a legend told in every world. A story not of destruction, but of bravery, unity, and love. Years later, a small statue stood in the Hall of Memory on Earth, a single human figure holding a torn flag staring toward the stars. Below it, engraved in simple letters, were the words, "They thought we were few. They were wrong. Humanity stands together. And every year when the stars shone brightest, the people of Earth looked up in silence, not in sorrow, but in pride." For their heroes had not just defended their world. They had reminded the entire galaxy what it truly meant to be human.